By the time the morning of a chase day arrives, the models have already done most of the heavy lifting. But this is also the point where many chasers make a critical mistake. They keep staring at model runs instead of looking at what the atmosphere is actually doing. In this episode, we'll talk about why observed data becomes the most important tool on the day of a chase and how models should shift into a supporting role. I'm Gabriel Harber, and you are listening to the Storm Chaser Coaching Podcast. Before we dive into the questions with Coach Trey Greenwood, there's a link in the description where you can get the cheat sheet for this episode. Cheat sheets contain all of the notes we use to build out each episode, and if you click that link one time, you'll unlock access to the cheat sheets for every single episode we ever have or ever will record. Trey, first question, why does observed data become the most important forecasting tool on the day of an event?
Observed data is king on the day of an event. When we're looking in the days leading up to a chase day, we're looking at models because it's basically gives us a guess at what the environment might evolve into by the day of the event. Now we're on the day of the event and we have what the environment looks like during the morning hours, and we can infer from that using our knowledge of meteorology how that might change throughout the day. And the observed data, such as soundings, where's there dry air, where's there moist air, where's there a capping inversion, etc. The upper air data, where's that trough? Is it a little bit different than what the models thought? The observed data is going to tell us exactly what the atmosphere is doing rather than just looking at the models, which is an estimate of what the atmosphere might be doing, which can be very wrong. So observed data is always going to be critical. And really, it's going to be the main thing you're going to want to base your forecast on the day of an event.
Now, of course, there are lots of different things people can look at, but what observational data sets are the most important for storm chasers to examine on a chase day?
So really, it's going to be upper air data, soundings, and surface observations. So upper air data, those maps come in at 12Z. Obviously, you have the SPC Mesoanalysis page, which we'll talk about here in just a second. It's a good proxy for observed data. It's not technically observed data 100%, but it does give you a decent look at what the environment looks like in the upper levels of the atmosphere at the current time. Then surface observations. You have all those weather stations across the US that are giving you very up to the minute data about surface temperatures, surface dew points, wind direction, wind speed, and that can really help you identify where the surface lows are, where the boundaries are, and where your best moisture is, etc., which of course are very critical in forecasting where your target might be. And then soundings. Observe soundings from the morning that go up at 7 a.m. Central Time, 12Z. Then throughout the day, oftentimes on bigger days, you'll get special soundings that are released. But those are going to show us the instability profiles in the vertical and the wind profiles in the vertical. Where are the wind profiles the strongest? Where do you have those sickle-shaped hodographs? Where do you have straighter hodographs? Where is there a capping inversion in place? Where's the instability thickest versus more skinny, etc.? So observed data, those are some of the main observed data sets that you should be using on the morning of an event.
Now, if you find yourself on a chase day having questions and wondering what certain things mean, you are not alone. In fact, everyone, especially when they're first starting out storm chasing, has all of those questions. And even once you become a veteran, you oftentimes would still like somebody to double check your work and make sure that you've crossed all your T's, dotted all of your I's. That's what our Discord community is for. You'll find the link to that in the description below. And you can chat with other storm chasers just like yourself, particularly in our storm chasing and forecasting forum, where we have it broken down by chase days, by long range forecasts, and you can just drop your analysis in there, ask people what their thoughts are, and you'll get a lot of helpful feedback. You can also talk to our coaches if you want to check out our premium subscription product, which is called the Chaser Academy. We'll send you a message when you join our Discord community with all of this information, so just check your DMs. Trey, next question. You mentioned it a little bit already, but how should the SPC mesoanalysis be used when analyzing the atmosphere? And maybe before you even answer that question, share with folks exactly what is the SPC mesoanalysis and how does it differ from direct surface observations?
Yeah, so the SPC Mesoanalysis page, it's a very valuable tool because it shows you basically what our current observations look like, and it can go out into the future a little bit. But because we don't have direct observations every hour, it's going to be data that is interpolated from the previous hour. So technically, it's based on the RAP model. So it's not 100% observed data, but it is a good proxy for observed data. And so you always should use it with a grain of salt because it is based on model data, but it is a great proxy for observed data as you're going through the day. but it could be very much different than the actual state of the atmosphere in certain areas. So always keep that in mind. And if something doesn't make sense, then, it might be something to keep in mind for your chase day. But the SPC mesoanalysis is an excellent tool to look at things like how the upper air pattern is progressing through the day, how that trough at 500 millibars might be moving through the day. You can see things like instability. It'll plot instability all across your area of interest. Wind shear, storm relative helicity, all those things. It has a bunch of different tools that you can use and products that you can pull up throughout the day. Again, not 100% observed data, but it is a great look at showing you where the best parameters might be overlapping in a chase day.
And with the SPC mesoanalysis, I think one of the first things, especially newer chasers, hear about is the cheat code. So, bonus question here, Trey. Could you maybe share with people what the cheat code is, how effective it is, and would you recommend people actually using that as a proxy maybe for other more in-depth analysis on a chase day?
On the mesoanalysis page, if you go to the multi-parameter fields tab and go down to surface vorticity and surface 3 kilometer ML cape, that is an overlap of surface spin, so vorticity, and low-level instability. Why these are important in the vast majority of tornado setups is that when you have a strong low-level updraft, so strong instability in the low level, strong 0 to 3 kilometer cape, co-located with surface spin or vorticity, updrafts that go up over the areas of those strong overlaps can really tilt and stretch that spin into the vertical and ingest them into the updrafts, and that can aid in tornadogenesis in supercells. This is a very big thing in something like land spout setups, which are very much focused on low-level instability and spin along a boundary. Cold core setups, where you are relying more on thermodynamics to get the job done versus wind shear. The cheat code is very useful for those cases, but it's also very useful for typical tornado cases where you still have a big trough and you have a lot of potential target areas and perhaps a lot of storms. The Vorticity and 3-Cape product can help you pinpoint areas where you have strong low-level instability and strong vorticity overlapping one another. Now, of course, if you have strong low-level shear already, it's not going to be as useful, perhaps, but especially that 0 to 3 kilometer cape parameter, that is oftentimes a non-negotiable for tornado setups. You can get tornado setups with weaker low-level instability, but the vast majority of tornado setups do feature quite a bit of low-level instability. So that 3-Cape product is going to be good to look at, and something I look at in most cases on chase days.
And that makes perfect sense, right? Why that's almost a non-negotiable is because if CAPE is essentially tornado fuel, it's a proxy for instability, then tornadoes need that to touch the ground need to have fuel that's near the ground. So that's kind of the way I think of it.
And again, it's not always the case that you have to have strong low-level instability. We see it in the southeast a lot, those very saturated low-level profiles. But what can help overcome that is a really strong low-level mesocyclone. And what do you see in the southeast? You see those massive looping hodographs in the low levels that indicate very strong low-level shear, stronger storm relative helicity, which usually means stronger low-level mesocyclones. So that can help overcome a lack of 0 to 3 kilometer cape and low-level instability. But in the vast majority of setups, you do want those low-level updrafts and low-level instability to be quite strong to help aid in the tornadogenesis process.
Now, we've talked a little bit about why observed data is king and how we should be mostly abandoning forecast models on the day of a chase, but how should we, if we're bringing them back into the fold a little bit, how should we be using the convection allowing models to check our forecasts? And I guess the obvious initial question here should also be, what is a convection allowing model? How does it differ from some of the other models that we might be using earlier in the forecasting process?
So our typical models like the NAM, GFS, European model, they cannot resolve individual convective elements. Convection allowing models, as the name suggests, can. So we can actually see, it can actually produce output that shows us individual convective elements like storms or line segments and whatnot. So that can give us a guess at what the radar might look like later on in an event. It can give us a look into how the event might be expected to evolve. Now, these have a lot of biases to them, so they should be used with a grain of salt, and they especially should not be used in the days leading up to the event with any type of certainty. But as you get to the morning of the event or a few hours out from the event, you can look at convection allowing models to get an idea. Now that we've had the observed data in the morning fed into those cams, the convection allowing models, they can be a little bit more accurate perhaps the morning of an event, and they can at least give you an idea of how the event might evolve. Again, you want to be focusing on the observed data because of the observed data is going to give you all the information you need. But the cams can be a nice way to check your work on your forecast. If you make a forecast using the observed data, it might be vastly different from what the cams are showing. then you might have to go back and say, did I miss something in my forecast, or is the observed data really telling me that the cams are wrong? And it might make you go back and analyze things. So the cams can be a good kind of check your work tool for your forecast. They should not be relied on by any means, but they can be something to look at briefly to give you at least a general idea of how the models are resolving storms later on in the event.
Okay, Trey, then last question, and we're going to keep it on the cams. Why is it dangerous to rely on a single cam like the HRRR?
As we said, every convection allowing model has its biases. For example, the HRRR tends to overmix, so it tends to really crater the dew points far too much compared to what happens in reality. And that can lead to some vastly different things than what actually happens on the HRRR. So take a holistic approach with the cams. You want to look at a bunch of different convection allowing models to see if they're on the same page. Just like we do with our deterministic models in the days leading up to the event, you want to see model agreement in the position of the trough, where the best moisture is, where the surface low is expected to set up, etc. Same thing with the cams. You want to see a general similar evolution to the convection with those cams to give you higher confidence in the overall outcome. Again, they all have their biases. So you need to take that with a grain of salt. But if multiple cams are showing a similar solution, that might lend you some higher confidence in the forecast rather than just relying on one specific cam at face value like the HRRR. That can be a very dangerous thing to do and can give you some pretty erroneous forecasts.
So, if I hear what you're saying correctly, then whenever we see the 3 kilometer NAM showing a squall line, we should go all in on that, right?
Absolutely not. If you're looking at cams and you want my advice on what to never look at, the 3 kilometer NAM's at the top of the list. It is atrocious.
Yeah, one of the consistent themes in the time that I've known Trey is him just absolutely ragging on the 3 kilometer NAM. He is not a fan.
It's atrocious. It either shows a squall line or nothing at all. And obviously, there's always an in between, and the 3 kilometer NAM usually never shows that. So I pretty much ignore it whenever I'm forecasting.
Remember to check out those links in the description below, and then watch another video.